Hello and welcome to the Life Burst. I'm really good at starting my openings. Hello and welcome to the Life Burst podcast, where we talk about the more competitive side of Wixoss. I'm your host, Babblemouth Andrew.
And I'm Tiffany. Welcome, everybody.
Hey, Tiffany, what's up? How's your week? See, I'm just a Babblemouth here. How's your Wixoss week been?
Pretty quiet actually. We did go to like a small little tournament last week.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, life kind of gets in the way and we've been busy with other stuff.
What did we place at that tournament?
We got first and second.
Paired at the last round against each other.
Yes.
And went from very serious card players explaining what our cards do, what order of turns we're in, asking if we're proceeding into the next turn, to just loud mouths yelling at each other.
Yeah, it is pretty fun when we get to play against each other because we like really trash talk each other. Because we're just like so, I don't know, like used to each other. That happens when you're like husband and wives. You guys know what I mean.
Just complete madness as I go, all right, I'm moving into my attack phase, and then Tiffany then says, hold up, I might have something to do, and I go like, no, we built the deck together, I know you got nothing.
So yeah, that's really all we've been up to. I have been, though, experimenting with trying to make the center for Ancient Surprise Umer work.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about it, but you know, that's actually a pretty cool experiment. Even if it doesn't work, it's a good experiment to do, and that's because, you know, grabbing a deck list online is totally fine and perfectly playable to do it that way. But building a deck list can help you understand the deck better and help you understand other players' decks better on a deeper level. And that's actually going to be the topic of our podcast today, is going to be how should exactly we build a deck.
How to build a deck.
Yeah. And the first thing that we want to talk about before we go into like the nuts and bolts of building a deck is as far as building a deck, why is it important to build a deck? I mean, you can copy a deck list online and run for it. It's totally fine. But why is it important to try to throw your own spin on it?
Well, I think it's important because then you can really find what works for you, like what cards you kind of like naturally gravitate towards. But also I think that you kind of said it earlier, it gives you a much deeper understanding of the cards when you're sitting yourself down and kind of forcing yourself to be like, okay, what is my number one step? And like really think about it, because when you put a deck together for yourself and you gain that deeper understanding, then you can kind of predict what your opponents are going to do if they have a similar deck or if they have specific cards in their deck.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's also good to try out certain decks. Like, you don't need to go crazy, right? You can take a sample deck list and then go, let's take Uchu, for example. You could take that and go, what if I take out the Fenrir's, which it feels sacrilegious.
How dare you?
But what if you're like, what if I take out the Fenrir's and I put in Saturns and Libras? I hear some people talk that this is a combo that might be worth mentioning. Is it a good combo?
And try it out.
And you might try it out and find something. I recently did that with Musica when someone was talking about what I call the Gap Bear combo.
Gap Bear.
It's Gap the Angel that gets stuff out of your graveyard and puts it into play, and then I don't know, Weird Bear. It's got a crazy name.
We call it Weird Bear. Let me see if I can look it up.
It's basically a level 1 that can grab cards out of your enter zone and swap it. So you can kind of constantly bounce Bear and Gap back into the field for some amount of enter. So it's a pretty good option to do something similar to that. But that's, you know, you try out weird decks and you're like, does this work? And you know, a lot of the times it won't, but sometimes you'll find stuff that does, and you'll go, actually, this is pretty valid on trying how to do it. Plus, sometimes you're right, Tiff. Like, sometimes you want to try something out, and you want to go, does this give me more knowledge? Like, I'm playing, it might be very strange to find the the sort of like mono blue freeze archetype, but it might show up at your meta at some point. You might need to know how to beat it. So it's you might build it and be like, yeah, it's not great, but it has some stuff, and then you know it at a deeper level. I also.
I'm sorry, I'm really trying to like look up the name of this. I just like, I'm like kind of sorry.
I think we have it in here if we really were
that
to
might
dig.
Be easier than looking through the entire card database.
But if we don't find it, it's just a 1-mana green Signy that swaps out stuff from your enter zone.
It's pretty fun, although we call it Weird Bear because it's really odd when you read the text. So
yeah, we don't have it on us, so
yeah, sorry.
You can look it up yourself. It'll be a fun little exercise. I think another good reason that you might want to just build out some random decks is it, like actually you said, Tiffany, learning what cards work for you and learning what tech you might want to try to find. It gets you an idea of like, oh, maybe I'm playing No Limit and I'm a very aggressive deck, but everything around me is also very aggressive. So what if I put up some walls that I learned exist from Card Jockey, right? Or Uchu. And then I play a few of those just so that way I can put the race more in my favor. You try it out, see if it works out or not. So I think that's another way that you can kind of metagame against your local card store and try to stay on top. But yeah, I think those are pretty much all of the reasons why you might want to try to build some of your own deck. And oh wait, no.
Plus, it's fun.
There you go. That's the one. I was like, there's one more.
Wait, there's one more.
I know. I'm so competitive minded that I'm like, that's it, right?
Who
There's
cares
no
about having fun in a game?
Yeah.
Ugh.
Sometimes you just want to meme your opponent, and you know what? Good on you if you want to meme your opponent.
What does that mean to meme your opponent?
Oh, like if you're doing the mono blue freeze deck or the mono blue discard deck where you're just like, it doesn't work. Like a lot of the times, but the one time it does work, it's like infuriating for your opponent.
But it's also like fun for you to play. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the other most important thing is, this is a game after all. You're supposed to have fun.
Yeah.
But it can be really fun to sit down and try and build a deck and experiment with, what works, what doesn't. I think that you could actually talk more about this than I could because you build decks much more often than I do. I'm much more inclined to be like, what is this deck? What does it do?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, I'll just play this.
Well, because I want the gauntlet, right? I want us to be able to play all of the decks that that we probably could run into, so that way we're never taken from surprise. But I'm not completely above fun. Like I
hope not.
I really like Robin Hood, and it's a pet card of mine for sure.
Oh, that's terrible.
But it's not a good card. but it's infuriating to play against, right? You know it's infuriating to play against.
It really is. Yeah.
But that's because I know when to play it because I've built the deck, so I know how bad of a card it is at all points except for when it's amazing.
And like the thing is that you would have never known that had you not taken the time to try and figure out how you want to play your deck and what other cards you can do in it to put in it to like flavor it more to your style.
Right.
And, the Robin Hoods for you have come up in your very late games and they are so annoying to deal with and no one expects it either.
No one expects the Robin Hood Inquisition.
So those are all the reasons why you guys should definitely experiment with deck building. So now we're going to tell you how do you do it?
Yeah, and I think the first thing that you need to kind of decide on, and I think it's an easy answer right now, but becomes a harder answer later down the line. Do you want to make a team deck or break teams, right? And what does that exactly mean?
Well, we're playing the Diva format. Full disclosure, neither one of us have played in the previous formats of the game because I'm going to be honest, they weren't in English. It was a little bit before our time. But in the Diva format, you have your center Larig, and then you have your 2 assist Larigs. So taking No Limit, for example, you've got your center Hirana, and then your assist Rei and Akino. So that's your, team. And with this team, you get a lot of cool, team abilities on certain cards that you can't do if you don't have the full team. Or even in spells like, what's the red spell?
Deafening Inferno.
Deafening Inferno. You'll get an additional 2,000 if you are playing the No Limit deck. So It's things like that that make, playing a team very much worth your while. But you can do something really radical, which is splitting the teams apart. So let's say you really like Hirana as a center, but you're not super keen on Rei's assists. So maybe you want to take Hirana and maybe keep Akino, and maybe throw like some DJ Lovett in there, or like some Towel if you're desperate like me to keep any piece of Ancient Surprise you can, because you love that team. Or if you wanted to do like a mono team, like let's say you wanted to take who's the center? Do we have a center green Larig? We have Ott. So let's say that you again wanted to desperately keep Ancient Surprise and you love the color green. So you would take Ott and VJ Wolf and the name is escaping me. Great Snake.
Oh, Bang.
And Bang.
Yeah, Bang.
That's hilarious. I know her better as Great Snake from that really awful spell.
Yeah, that spell is bad.
So that's what it means to break a team, is if you're picking and choosing who you want to be on your Diva team.
Right, and there's a variety of reasons for it. So, for example, I'm looking... My favorite team is Uchu no Hajimari. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you're playing Dr. Tamago, all of the assists work really well together with the team piece, with the center. And at some point, I'm going to want to switch over to Nova. And Nova's also, there's a lot of great assists in that team. Nova's really good, and the whole thing kind of works together in this sort of mid-range stall strategy, right? And then Bang's center is like out of nowhere. Suddenly, it's just a big green deck, and none of the assists help for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it ends up being like I've looked at it over and over again, and I've been like, yeah, there's no good way to play this until I realized, well, I don't really need to do it in a team. I could just play basically green stompy, green red stompy, and break teams, and suddenly there's an angle you can actually play with that. Basically what I'm trying to say is you need a good reason to break teams,
right?
And the good reason to break teams is if all of the team synergy stuff doesn't help you towards your game plan.
Yeah, and that's one of the main things that I was running into when I was trying to build my center Umar deck, is that Umar in and of herself as a center really is not that strong. She doesn't particularly have a win condition, but then Ott as an assist really does nothing to add to that. So those were like the main issues that I was running into.
Right, and then you look at your team piece and you go, Harmonic Call. Okay, that's 8, enter, I'll never get there.
Exactly.
And then you go, all right, well, what's the team Signy that I'm going to be running? It's, which is Yogg?
Yogg Sothoth is the what's it? Whatever. Yeah, Yogg is Umar's, like, special Signy. Yeah. Like, every kind of, like, center or so has their, like, special Signy, and Yogg is hers.
Yeah. And
which is also, like, okay.
Yeah, it's okay. So you're not getting much from staying in team at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of those where, like, I mean, the other thing is that she's really not that strong of a center anyway. So moving forward, I might not even use her as a center, because the more that I've experimented with trying to make this deck work, the less I find that it works.
Right. And I think that actually brings us to the next thing, which is when you build this deck, right? Is your goal to make a good stuff deck or a synergistic deck?
Ooh.
And so Umir's synergistic type of thing is she does lane switching. Mm-hmm. And is lane switching good?
It's debatable. It does fun things when you get things that lane switch and do things when they switch lanes.
Yeah, but it might be possible that there's not enough real support in lane switching to make a viable deck out of it.
Yes.
And that's the problem that you have with synergistic teams. I'll throw another one out there.
Sure.
Toko with Sanbaka with the virtuals. There's just not a lot of virtual support.
Well, yeah, outside of the first, or sorry, set 0, there really isn't.
So you can make a synergistic deck with that, and it's a fine deck. I'd say tier 2, but it is you're going down a certain path, right? Some decks will build themselves. Like, for example, it's pretty clear what you should be doing in Uchu. Dr. Tamago is basically like, yes, you want to level up your assists pretty quickly, eat them all, and then grind your opponent's resources out.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear. Harana is the easiest one, I think, because it's
Yeah.
just like, hello, attack. You should be attacking.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I think it's also important to understand that when you're picking between a synergistic deck and a good stuff deck, you also kind of have to decide, where is my win condition here? Like, how, like lane switching is fun. How do I win the game with that?
Yeah.
And that's the other important question to answer for
And then with good stuff, right? The answer to that might be pretty easy. It's just you're not playing anything really synergistic, but what you are playing is lots of very powerful cards. And I think Musica, for example, in Diagram is basically the headliner for good stuff
You
decks.
know what? You're actually kind of right. You are right with that. Like, I always kind of wondered, like, what made Diagram, like, a decent deck to play, because it doesn't really, like, vibe with me personally. And I never really saw the whole, like, direction it was going in, but maybe that's because it's a good stuff deck.
Yeah, it doesn't have direction.
It doesn't necessarily have a direction.
You have to create the direction
Which
for it.
also, like, in favor of a good stuff deck, it's actually a little harder to play against, because you're not exactly sure what direction the deck is going in. So as an opponent, it's a little bit more difficult, at least for me, to sort of plan my attacks, because I have a very specific way that I need to be going, but a deck like Diagram is a little bit more flexible in that.
Right, and that's, again, full circle why building your own decks might help you here, because then you might know what to expect from a directionless deck like Diagram. You might know, oh, these are the general good cards. I have a list of like 20 of them in my head. Any of them could pop up. Let me go ahead and run the scenarios. Is there anything I should be worried about?
Right.
So I think you got to decide that. And then once you do, you kind of have a clear goal for what you want your deck to do. And I think the goal at that point is not to stray away from that plan at all.
Yes, which is very easy, because these cards have beautiful foils that are very tempting.
Yes.
So it is a little difficult to make sure that you stay on that path.
Yeah,
but
100%. I'm trying to put Tree Froggy in literally every deck that I possibly can, just because I like Tree Froggy.
Right. Or the Slime Mage. Like, I desperately want to play her because she's so cute, but I cannot figure out.
She is actually playable.
What?
In
Where?
set 3 and set 4.
Spoilers.
Because it's a demon. It's a demon.
Oh,
And so it has some demon sacrifice playabilities in it.
Well,
so.
we'll make a podcast on that one in the future, I suppose. So, okay. I really struggle with this. I know that I do when I'm trying to build decks, because, again, it's not my forte, which is totally fine. But how do you find what helps you stick to your plan as you're picking through your menagerie of cards?
Sure. So I, generally speaking, try to make some rules on myself. Now rules are made to be broken at some point, right? Like, you might think, all right, well, so in my Uchu deck, I want to put up walls. I want to stall. So I'm looking for things that say freeze on them. I'm looking for things with high power that are tough to kill. I'm looking for things that say shadow, right? And then you look at, like, Robin Hood, and you're like, that card does not say any of those words. and you realize, like, it's because I put so much dirtily stuff in my deck. At one point, I lost the game because I was just sitting there, and I made it really hard for my opponent to win, but inevitably they did because I just sat there. and that's when I was like, oh, maybe I should add something that wins the game. I need a win condition.
Yeah. And that goes back to what I was talking about, is how do you win?
But adding those general rules can help you find guidelines for what you want. I think one of the easier ones with deck building is Harana. Because what you can do with that is you're like, all right, I want to be aggressive. And you kind of look at some game plan stuff and you're like, mono red exists to basically be aggressive. So let me just go down this mono red path. And you start going down this mono red path. And that's when you start getting stuff like, okay, maybe I should make a rule that all of my cards should either attack really well or have some form of lane opening. And when you start doing that type of thing, right, you get a direction that you can pull out of.
But is that how you build a synergistic deck, or how would you approach that from trying to build a good stuff stack?
I think it works for both. The reason being that you can basically say, okay, for example, let's take Toko, right? Toko wants basically everything to say virtual on it. That's a virtual signy. So when you do that, you can go, all right, just a rule of thumb, I want everything to say virtual. And that helps limit a lot of stuff. Like, inevitably, again, those rules are made to be broken a little bit if you want, but it'll help you get your rough draft of your deck up. And then you kind of look into it more, and you're like, oh, Toko also likes graveyard recursion, and it also likes things that are power reductions. And then you can start looking a little bit like, okay, this is kind of what I'm going after. I'm looking for things that are virtual. I'm looking for things that are power reduction. I'm looking for things that recur from the graveyard. And then you go like, oh, but what about this thing that lane fills? And you go, no. Stick to the plan.
So shiny, can't do it.
Yeah. So I think it works for both, right? Like, you could say that you are a good stuff stack, right? But even good stuff stacks kind of have some kind of plan. Again, the difference is you are giving it the direction, not the cards themselves are giving you the direction. So for example, with Musica, I've built 2 decks currently that I think are good diagram decks. And one is basically like all about being rainbow, likes having all 3 colors in it. Another one is all about basically being removal centric, like it's just like grinding the opponent's board state down constantly.
But that also helps it when it uses the team piece to mill the team potentially, right? And
then the next one I plan to build in set 2, so I'll have 3 diagram decks because there's so much diagram that can do. It will be more focused on making the opponent discard cards because there are some black synergies with discarding. And so basically I'm choosing my own direction for those decks, right? And I think you once you make a direction, like I said, you can kind of have some guidelines to help force yourself down the right path, right?
Okay, so now that we kind of know like what we're looking for, where do we start? How do we get started?
That's a good question. What do you think is probably the most powerful thing in your deck that you're doing every game?
Your center.
Yeah, you're absolutely growing your center every game. I don't.
Every turn.
Yeah, every turn. I think there's been one time in my games that I've forced my opponent not to be, like, the inability to grow. And I think there's one time I purposefully chose not to grow because I needed to wait till the following turn. Every other time.
Not to grow your center?
Yeah. It was in a weird scenario where growing Tamago would draw me a card and I needed to deprive Diagram of the ability of milling me out.
Oh.
So I waited on it.
Big brain.
I know, it was very strange.
Right, but your center really is going to give you, like, I feel like it's just going to give you the most direction.
It is literally the backbone, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the assists is kind of the muscles, but like your center is like your skeletal structure of the deck.
Right. So I think you start with the center and kind of move from there. What works with it, what doesn't work from it. And that gives you, I think your piece is actually the second thing you should be choosing.
Oh, you think not your assists?
No, because the assists have so much flexibility to them, right? If you were to be like...
Oh, I guess so. If you're picking out your center and then you want to pick out your pieces, more or less your win condition, that does make sense.
Yeah. And again, you guys should remember that your L-Rig deck is the most important part of your deck building because this is the cards that you use every single game. This is the cards that you have access to every game. You don't need to draw them. They're there.
Oh, that is true.
So
I didn't even think about it like that.
Yeah, they are literally...
They're your constants.
Yeah, think about it this way, right? You start with a random opening hand of 6 or 7, right? But you're always have a hand of 12, and that 12 is your L-Rig deck.
That's true.
So I think your piece is probably the next thing you should choose. They're pretty clear and decisive options, right? Like if you were to go like Endless Punchline has a very clear direction to it. And if you want Endless Punchline, you really want Endless Punchline. And if you don't want Endless Punchline, you don't want Endless Punchline, you know? Like, that's how it
Wow,
goes.
so simple.
I know, it's like they're kind of binary. Like, some pieces are a little less binary. Like, is it better to use Chime of the Blessed Key, Kirikirum, or Xeno Cluster that's coming out in the next set? And the answer is, I don't know. Pick one.
Pick whichever one feels good.
Yeah, it's like you got a little bit of flexibility for that, but some of these pieces like Harmonic Call will be like, yep, this is what you're doing.
Yeah, this is it.
And then
be like Rainbow.
Yeah, and then after that you pick your assists, right? You got to go like, all right, well, does my level 1 want a lane open?
How does it get me there?
Right. Does my level 1 want a lane open? Does it want to draw me cards?
Right.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So then, so we've picked out our center, we picked our pieces, and by now we have finished sifting through our assists, and everything feels real good.
Yeah,
It feels really strong.
And you should remember, it's also like never set in stone. You could be like, you know what? I'm realizing half my Signy draw cards, maybe I don't need a draw assist, and then you like swap it out.
Yeah.
So you can. It's an ever evolving process.
Or even when you're like playing, like when I was playing Card Jockey, and I had some assists for Love It that I was switching in and out because I was like, I don't know, is this too expensive? Is this kind of like how I want to play? You know, and even when you're play testing, it's still pretty flexible.
Yeah.
So, you know, just because you build it doesn't mean it's done. It's
Right.
just like the first draft.
Right. And then when you're done your L-Rig, you've got your main deck next.
Yeah. All right, let's do it. Let's jump into it.
And what's our like general skeleton for what we're like, and it can change for sure, but what's our general skeleton that we're going for our
In
main deck?
terms of curve.
Yeah.
I would say 16 level 1s, 8 level 2s because they're kind of awkward, and then 12 level 3s with 4 flex spots. Now, it's also important to remember that your 16 level 1s should automatically include 4 guards.
Yeah, 4 Servant Sharp.
Please
absolutely.
don't do what I did, which was the first draft of my Umer deck had no guards. I like totally forgot about them during the deck building process. So realistically, in your level 1s, you have 12 level 1 Signies and 4 guards.
Yeah. It just they go on the curve, right? Like I've never been afraid to play a guard on the field, and people look at it and think I'm strange, and I'm like,
It is a Signy.
it's a Signy and it's defending a lane life cloth right now, and that's what I need it to do, so it's saving me something.
Yeah, that's actually something else that we could talk about in later podcasts,
yeah.
how to maximize your cards.
Right, and you know, for what it's worth, I have thought about taking guards out of my my no limit deck before.
Bold.
I think it is bold. I think inevitably you should be like, well, actually, this thing serves dual purpose in no limit. It's able to change the race math if I'm up against another aggro deck, and put that race more in my favor. Or it lets me attack, and I have a level 1 here at the very worst. So, again, I think to your point, it is definitely a staple.
Yeah. And I can't remember if I said this, but you do have, like, don't forget your spells. Outside of that curve that we just gave you, you also have 4 flex spots. You can decide to put in 4 spells, or if you want to go a little bit heavier on certain Signies, or, you know, whatever. And also, you know, remember, you have 20 slots for Life Burst. So, you know, keep those in mind, because you will want all 20 of those, but you can't go over.
Yeah, you got to balance it out.
You got to balance it.
I guess theoretically, there's nothing in the rules that say that you can't do under 20 life burst. I think you can't.
No, actually, I think it says that you have to have 20.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay.
If I remember correctly, because I printed out the rules and highlighted them as I read them. There's some weird stuff in there, but, you know, it is from them, so.
So I think you're right about that. And those numbers can change too. I think they're just a good starting point, right? Like Card Jockey, for example, tends to play 14 level 1s, 4 level 2s, and then the rest are like spells and level 3s.
Right, but that's because of its endless punchline win condition.
Right. So you're able to mix it out. I've seen some control decks be a little bit more heavier on the 3 drops, and I've seen some more aggro decks be heavier on the 1-drops and 2-drops. So you can flex things around and see what happens. Here's some other general good deck building tips, I think, that are worth mentioning. And again, as you're building, you should be focusing on what your goal is, right? Like, my goal is to hit them in the face as hard as possible. Okay, then you want things like Lancelot or maybe Romels that do that.
Lancey. I love Lancey.
And then if you're like, I need to stall, you might want weird cards like Helium that basically say, go ahead, get rid of this off my field. Watch your Elrigs not attacking this turn.
Ew, that one's so sneaky.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
had that on the field in our last game, and I was like, I guess I'll just leave that there, and I won't open that lane ever.
Yeah, and there's some weird text too. Like for example, when I was playing once, someone who was like, oh, I know Diagram, but they knew their version of Diagram, played against me, and I was playing the Weird Bear, Gap Bear combo, and they removed one of my Signy, and then they attacked, and I moved over my bear, and then I put it in the enter zone and pulled out something that was going to wall it and put it in place, and they were like, oh. And I was like, yep. And it's just one of those things where it's just like, yeah, if you don't experience all of the crazy different choices here, you might not know exactly what you're looking for.
Right, exactly. Oh, there it is. Okay. Nobody Betsu. Code Maze.
You were so much better at say it one more time.
Nobody Betsu?
Yeah, I'm terrible at these Japanese names. I'm doing set reviews right now, and I just run into these and I go, nope, this one is a level 1 Signy that does it.
So, well, it might still be incorrect. Please feel free to correct my pronunciation in the comment section down below. I'm not a native Japanese speaker. I just sound it out. Like, every 2 syllables is what gets a sound because those are, like, the characters. It might be Nobody Bets. I could be wrong. But that's the Weird Bear.
Yeah,
I've been looking for it this whole time.
So anyways, I think some other good general deck building strats that you can do, aside from just being like, yep, I'm sticking to one strategy and trying to figure it out. You can also go online, see what a variety of other decks are doing, and it kind of gives you a card pool in your head to work with for that kind of thing.
Yeah, you can like kind of look at the patterns from those decks and kind of see like what everyone is like generally putting in their deck and what everybody seems to be kind of switching in and out of. It gives you a good like framework. Here's
some weirder tips that are very rarely online, but I'll throw them in here.
Gonna make it weird.
Make it weird. Imagine what your perfect opening hand is, right? And then all of those cards hopefully don't have Life Burst, because you want to be mulliganing away the cards that have Life Burst, so that way when you put down your Life Cloth, there's a higher chance that they're Life Burst.
I didn't even think of that.
It's a very weird one, right?
Yeah, that's...
So, for example, in your...
I'm learning, too.
There you go. In No Limit, your like goal is to basically open a hand of almost entirely level 1s and level 2s. So you probably want your Life Bursts in your level 3s. Whereas if you're playing Uchu no Hajimari, you're doing more of I want my Life Bursts on cards that are more irrelevant for the early game, but I do have some staple cards that I want. For example, Fenrir every game, and Fenrir doesn't have Life Burst. So if I open a hand up and I have a Fenrir in my opening hand, I usually keep the Fenrir there.
Yeah.
I don't immediately toss it to look for level 1s.
Even if it's a level 3.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Because I know my game plan hinges a little bit on that. Whereas Quinn, the Labyrinth Queen, that has a Life Burst, and it's also a card I want turn 4, 5-ish, so I can mulligan it away. Some other things that you want to think about are outside of what's your perfect opening hand. You might want to think, what is my perfect board state look like on my first turn? What's my perfect board state look like on my third turn? What's my perfect board state look like on my 5th turn? And that can kind of help you figure out, like, okay,
how do you deal with those?
Right, and also what amount of something that you should have. So, for example, Robin Hood, I don't want until turn 5. And so
Yeah, you're just gonna enter that if you pull that turn 2.
yeah, so the correct number of Robin Hoods is probably lower than 4, right? Whereas Fenrir's, I want all points in times as many as I can have, so I want 4 of, right? Another thing that you can do to figure out what's the right amount of cards to put in your deck for something is a tool called the Hypermetric Calculator.
Excuse me?
I know, it's a crazy one. Just Google.
Is this from your Magic days?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. It is just Google geometric hyper calculator, and MTG as well. Just throw the MTG in there because you'll get one that's specifically made for card games.
Yeah.
And it basically says a formula. It wants you to plug in numbers. And it basically says, how likely are you to draw something based on how many of these do you have in the deck?
Right.
So, for example, this doesn't just have to be like, oh, well, I want 4 Fenrir's because I want 4 Fenrir's. But it could be like, I need to have at least 2 cards that freeze in my hand by turn 5.
Right.
So I need 12 cards that say freeze on them.
So does this also, this kind of goes back to, correct me if I'm wrong, this kind of goes back to in Magic the Gathering, for those of you out there that have played or have played for a long time, it's popular to have something called fetch lands in your deck because they allow you to thin the deck out to give you a higher percentage of drawing certain cards. So is this the same chart that kind of helps you to like quantify that?
Sort of, yeah. It just basically, I'm oversimplifying it here. It basically says what percent are you likely to have X amount of cards that do something that you want by a certain amount of cards drawn. And that's how a way you can kind of figure out, all right, well, I want to have at least 4 lane openers, so removal spells, by a certain point in the game. How many cards do I need to have that are basically lane openers in order to do that? So it kind of quantifies it for you. So, for example, Nova Dirty, what that one does is it lets me look at the top 7 cards of my deck and find a blue Signy and a white Signy and add it to my hand. And at one point I was failing to find a white Signies because I didn't have enough white Signies in there. So I had to figure out how many white Signies do I have to have in my deck to hit that with a 90% accuracy.
Gotcha.
And then it turns out the answer is like around 9 to 11.
Oh.
So you stick that amount of numbers in there.
Oh, that's the fancy way to deck build. Mine's just trial and error.
Yeah, I mean, you could trial and error it too, you know.
Sometimes it's a little bit of a slower process.
but there is ways to look at it in that direction. And then other things that you might want to look at is also like, okay, what is commonly being played in other decks? What's commonly being played in the meta? And does this help me in that scenario? I think the classic one that gets used over and over and over again is Xiao.
Oh yeah, Zhao Yun.
Zhao Yun, the one that has Shadow level 2 Signy.
Yeah, it's a level 1. It's a white, isn't it?
Yeah, and you go, why is this card even worth mentioning? And then you realize it just doesn't die when Lancelot's being used.
Yeah, it's a little bit more sticky in the lane when you put it out, especially if you put it out in your opening hand. It's a little bit harder to deal with.
You go like, oh, it counters Lancelot, and you move on with your life. You know, you're like, okay, so that's a good reason.
Yeah, I've definitely tried to attack those in my day, and then my opponent will be like, Shadow, and I'll be like, yeah, you right though.
Yeah. Like there's been a time that I remember a board state, and I was playing No Limit against you, and you were like, here's an Arcwane, here's a Zhao.
Oh yeah,
and
that's
right. And I went and looked at my hand that had nothing but like Hera's and Lancelot's in it, and went, yep, I'm not breaking this anytime soon.
And then you gotta put out Signy though, so you kind of are like, I guess I won't pay for this Lancelot.
Yeah, it's just a 5,000.
Yeah.
So that's another good thing that you can kind of do to do some basic deck building. And I actually think you hit on something pretty good. Don't be married to your cards. Like you might like them; they might be cool tech,
How dare you? I marry all of my wives.
But if they don't work, you
Switch them out.
Yeah, switch them out. You know, they're like, all right, cool.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, when you're going to a tournament, I don't think you're allowed to sideboard in this game.
No.
So don't do that then. But when you're playtesting at home, definitely, you know, like switch out your assists, switch out your like 4 sets, and see where it goes.
And you know, I think there is kind of being results-based mindset, and you got to remember that results-based mindset doesn't necessarily mean that you should take every loss that you do as being like, oh, this is a sign this card sucks.
Yeah, definitely not.
You might want to think, this card failed. Why did it fail? Mm-hmm. And then kind of move towards that direction. Because sometimes you'll just, or for example, you'll get beaten by a card that you're like, I swear this sucks.
Yeah.
And then you realize, no. I lost because I was enter starved, not because this card killed me.
Yeah, and I think it's important to just like to be intuitive, but also be observant. Mm-hmm. Like how do the cards feel when you play them? Is it doing what you thought it should be doing? But also, you know, why are certain things happening, and how is your opponent responding to these being on the board?
Yeah.
I think that all those things kind of go into like, you know, I'm a very like feelings based person, so I'm kind of like, well, does this card like feel right? Does it feel awkward? Does it feel like it's doing what it's supposed to? And you know, some people quantify that with numbers. I guess I'm a little bit more intuitive with it.
Yeah, and I think the last tip that I have is go in the deep end if you're gonna make a change, right? Like,
what does that mean?
Well, so a lot of people, and it's probably correct, by the way, to if you're saying, well, I need this card only in this one niche scenario, so let me put a one of in this deck and see if that helps my matchup a little bit. But you're never really gonna draw that card very often if it's a one of. So when you're at least testing, go in the deep end, throw 4 in there, see if it makes any difference whatsoever. And if it doesn't, and it starts popping up, and you're like, oh, these are
take them
not
out.
So great. Yeah.
Take them out.
Take them out, you know, kind of thing. But I think that's all I can think of with deck building. Anything else on your end?
No, not for me. I think that's everything. So go on out there today, build some weird decks, see if they work. Maybe post them on the Wixoss, I think it's wixosstcg.eu. They have a couple deck lists up there that you can kind of look through, maybe add your own. And comment down below. Let us know what weird cards you've made work for you. Like, do you have a Gap Weird Bear combo that we should know about? Let us know.
Yeah. And as always,
may you always flip a life burst.
Thanks for watching, guys.
We'll see you guys in the next podcast. In the next podcast. In the next podcast. In the next podcast. In the next podcast.